Oh, all right. This guy, he's not. He's schooling his land. Maybe that's 30, 40 years. Well, we're seeing each other like constant. That's right. Yeah. I didn't have one, so I just moved on for some. Thanks. Trying to actually somebody I went to college. Yeah. Well, as far as I know. are calling to order the regular meeting of the Village of Barrington Hills Board of Trustees on Monday, February 23rd, 2015 at 6:32 p.m. in the MacArthur Room. Dolores, please take the roll.
Trustee Barrington?
Here.
Trustee Constance?
Yes.
Trustee Maloney? Here. Trustee Sullivan? Here. Trustee Messer?
Here.
Trustee Gould?
Here.
President Blunt?
Here, thank you. At this time, which is our custom, if you please rise and join us in the pledge of allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. At this time, with the consent of the board, I'd like to move 2 items forward. They be items 10-2 under appointments. At this time, I would like to entertain a motion to consider Rich Semmelsberger for permanent seating as the new police chief of Barrington Hills. I am formally nominating Rich tonight for consideration by this board. I would be pleased to hear a motion concurring with this request. So moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? I would like to add for the residents, I've had the pleasure of getting to know Rich and work with him at the village now as our acting chief for several months after the replacement of Chief Murphy. He has impressed me with his work ethic, attention to detail, and his knowledge of our community, as well as his passion to protect and serve the residents of this community. I had a formal interview with Rich where I can tell the community that I believe that we will be in good hands under his leadership moving forward. Is there any comments that the board would like to make at this time?
I've known Rich for many years as a patrol officer and working with him in various capacities, running a couple of events with the village and then through the 50th anniversary. And everything that we've ever worked on has worked smoothly, except for catching that dog. And I think that he will do an outstanding job. He knows the village, its residents, and he's been involved for many years. I think it's a good selection.
Thank you, Patty. Any other comments?
I'd say we'd be lucky to have.
I agree.
Any further comments?
Rich is the man.
All right, at this time, Dolores, please take the roll.
Trustee Barrington?
Yes.
Trustee Constance?
Yes.
Trustee Maloney?
Yes.
Trustee Sullivan? Yes. Trustee Messer?
Yes.
Trustee Gould?
Yes.
President Blunt?
Yes, thank you and congratulations. Official picture and Dolores, if you would swear. Not a lot of room in here tonight, but if you would swear in Rich, that would be great. There's Dolores. More room.
I, Richard W. Semmelsberger,
I, Richard W. Semmelsberger,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of Illinois,
and the Constitution of the State of Illinois,
and that I will faithfully discharge the duties
and that I will faithfully discharge the duties
as Chief of Police
as Chief of Police
for the Village of Barrington Hills
for the Village of Barrington Hills
according to the best of my ability.
according to the best of my ability. Real quick, if I could just thank the village board and the mayor for this opportunity. I've been with Barrington Hills for 26 years. I really look forward to the challenges. I need to thank the people that have worked with all these years. Without their support, I certainly wouldn't be in this position. So thank you to all the people that worked. Thank you.
Secondly, at this time, I would entertain a motion to consider Joe Colditz as the new deputy chief for the Village of Barrington Hills. I'm formally nominating him for consideration by this board. Again, I would be pleased to hear a motion concurring with this request.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
discussion? Again, I'd like to mention Joe's been working very diligently on behalf of the residents. He's shown a desire to continually look for ways to improve the level of service for the residents of Barrington Hills. Again, had an interview with Joe and was very impressed with his knowledge of our community, and look forward to him working in assistance with Chief Semmelsberger, who had great things to say about him. So again, I'm looking forward to working with him. Any further comments?
I think this will be a great team.
I'd just like to comment that in talking to the chief, he gave him a very strong endorsement, has a high level of trust in him, and considers him his idea guy, and I think it's ideal that the chief gets to have his, #1 choice in that position.
Thanks.
Like I said, I've been very impressed with Joe and the time that I've interacted with him, and couldn't think of a better guy to fill the post.
I think it's a good team.
I agree, and I did have an opportunity to meet with Joe as well, as the personnel chair, and he had excellent ideas for the village moving forward, and I think he's going to be a great asset with the deputy.
Great, thank you. Without any further discussion, Dolores, please take the roll.
Trustee Harrington?
Yes.
Trustee Constance?
Yes.
Trustee Maloney?
Yes.
Trustee Sullivan?
Yes.
Trustee Messer?
Yes.
Trustee Gould?
Yes.
President McDonald?
Yes, thank you. Congratulations.
I, Joseph S. Colvin,
I, Joseph S. Colvin,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
to support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of Illinois,
and the Constitution of the State of Illinois,
and that I will faithfully discharge the duties
and I will faithfully discharge the duties
as Deputy Chief of Police
as Deputy Chief of Police
for the Village of Barrington Hills,
for the Village of Barrington Hills,
according to the best of my ability.
according to the best of my ability.
Chief, that's your first.
I just did.
Thank you, sir.
It's on there.
Again, with the consent of the board, I would like to, in advance of public comments, we have two guests tonight from District 220. We have Brian Harris, the superintendent of 220, and we also have Brian Battle, the president of the school board, here to address us tonight in reference to, I believe, Lot 4, Lot 5, and the conservation lands adjacent to the high school along Hart Road. So thank you for being here.
Correct. Thank you for having us. Brian Battle, Brian Harris, and Brian, so it's easy to remember. Thank you for allowing us to address you tonight. Brian and I both recognize the full agenda. If you see one, you guys have one. So we will try to be brief. As you know, Mr. Lombard, the Lombard family had donated Lot 5, which is just across Hart Road from the high school, kind of to the north, just south of that office building that sits in your building. In December of last year, we also purchased Lot 4, which sits right at the kind of northeast corner of Hart Road and Lake Cook. That sits in the village of Barrington, as well as the conservation area that sits in your village, Barrington Hills. All three properties are subject to an intergovernmental agreement that was entered into many years ago by the Village of Barrington Hills, the Village of Barrington, and the owners of the Flint Creek Crossing properties. I want to talk to you just a little bit about kind of our long-term look at these properties, as well as some short-term things that we're going to pursue here, starting in the next few weeks, and then open it up to any questions that you might have. We have no specific long-term use for that property, but what it does allow us to do is rethink the high school campus in a way that we can deal with not only some building issues and growth, as well as how to improve the layout and utilization of the athletic fields, not just for the high school students, but also the community through sports. That's a process that we anticipate being a long process, measured in several years. Right? We're not rushing into it. Our intent is at some point in the next year or two to establish a community-based group that will look at that kind of master plan for the high school and look at a lot of different objectives and try to come up with what that plan would look like. So, and that's a process that we would certainly extend an invitation to the Village of Barrington Hill as one of the stakeholders to participate in any way that you're comfortable in that process. Before we begin that kind of community-based effort to look at the high school campus, one of the first things we need to do, though, is look at a couple of the agreements, including that intergovernmental agreement that governs the use of lots 4 and 5 in the conservation easement. The way it was originally drafted, school uses were not contemplated as an approved or special use. We will be trying to go to your village, the Village of Barrington. We've already gotten kind of approvals from the Flint Creek Crossing owners to support an amendment that allows school use. And we hope that over the next few months, we can work through those legal details, answer any questions that people have, so that the first step that we would like to pursue is amending that intergovernmental agreement. Once we get that done, we'll then begin to start having some conversations about planning, including, on the conservancy area, how to involve our community-based groups like the Barrington Area Conservation Trust, the Citizens for Conservation, in working with us to establish a not just good conservation management of the area, but also a really good outdoor education facility for the community. So those are our plans. Our first step starts with that intergovernmental agreement, which, we've directed our lawyers to start working with the villages to pursue that. So we're here just to try to provide a little bit of guidance on our thoughts regarding these properties and answer any questions that you guys might have.
Any questions from the board regarding?
It's too early. Ask questions.
Yeah, right. Right, and one thing I want to be very clear about, we understand kind of all the zoning restrictions, setbacks, building height, all that was in that was negotiated as part of that initial intergovernmental agreement. We are not seeking changes to any of that. Right? Because honestly, we don't know what we would use it for. And so until we know how we would rethink the high school campus, how lots 4 and 5 would be utilized, at that point in time is when we come to you with more specifics.
I think one thing to keep in mind, it is not a school use right now, and that's the key. And for us to do anything, anytime we acquire property, we always have to get it zoned effectively. And we know for sure it won't be commercial, which is what it currently is. That's for sure, we know that. So that's why we want to start that process and hopefully be able to move that forward.
Any other questions we can answer at this time?
The only thing I would want to add is I know that Lot 5 is in Barrington Hills, Lot 4 is in Barrington.
Right.
There's been discussions about figuring out how we're going to move forward in that regard. And so I just want to make sure that everyone's aware that one, we control and have an IGA in Barrington, and the other, it's the reverse. So is there any desire from the school to change that, or?
I think that if we're talking about, look, you as the Village of Barrington Hills even have some influence on what happens on Lot 4, even though it's in the Village of Barrington, because you're a party to the intergovernmental agreement. Right? So, Lot 4, in addition to the intergovernmental agreement, the Village of Barrington placed a special ordinance that affects Lot 4. So with the Village of Barrington, we'll be looking at that special ordinance as well as the intergovernmental agreement. But any uses of Lot 4, Conservation Easement 5, the way, legally, you guys have every right to insert yourself in what you want to see happen you know, as part of that collective development that includes not just those 3 properties that we talked about that are now in the property of District 220, you know, but also it impacts kind of lots 1 and 3.
I do think long-term as well, you know, long-term, down the road, whatever we end up doing there, there would be some, at some point, some conversation about if, you know, if we have a facility there, if we have a field there, or whatever we end up doing. You know, all of our services right now on that campus are all with the Village of Barrington. So we probably at some point down the road would want to, you know, have that conversation about what makes sense for the taxpayers in the community, yeah, including the school district.
Yeah, I know the Village of Barrington would like to initiate a conversation.
Yeah.
I think, you know, the school district is neutral on that. That's something, you know, we can participate collectively with both villages and see what makes sense.
I think that the Village of Barrington Hills in general would certainly support the conservation areas along there, and that's an absolutely beautiful area. We wouldn't want to see anything jeopardize that. When you mentioned sports fields, I would just say my sensitivity kind of ignites in that I wouldn't want to see the kind of lighting situation that you have on your current sports field, because I think that would really impact those who live on that western portion of the village.
Right, I think we understand that. I mean, and I don't think that's why when
Speaking long-term.
when we look at the existing lighting standards, right, that are, you know, that are set up,
Yeah.
I think we're fine, right? We're not, I mean,
Well, I just had to say that.
but I think that's like when we get the group together, you know, to do this kind of master layout, you know, I think that's the kind of feedback on some of the parameters, right? I mean, you know, the Village of Barrington would represent their residents on the other side of our campus, right? Because they don't want lights, big bright lights over there either, right? So it's fair to say if there's any lights that you can't control the diffusion on, you want to keep them in kind of the middle of the campus, right? As opposed to the outside.
Our football field has the bright lights, but we do have some, you know, fields that don't have any lights, you know, if during the daytime, so it kind of varies. We certainly would keep that in mind.
I'd just like to add one thing. I know last year, I'm not sure residents are aware, but we actually, thanking the school district, were able to have the fireworks display because of the fact that you granted access to Lot 5. And I think Chief Swanson's here, so I'd like to thank him as well. We're running out of space in Barrington Hills to hold the fireworks display, so coming around the next summer, I'm hoping that we can all work together in that capacity as well.
We
So,
all like the fireworks.
okay. Thank you.
Didn't we communicate, I remember a couple meetings ago, we talked about this and we came up with some items that we wanted to communicate to the school board. And were you guys, did you?
Yeah,
receive
we
it?
did, and we did receive that, and we have that list, and, you know, like I said, you know, some of the items kind of address individual issues, parking lots, we don't even know if that's what we need to be doing, right? And there was a question about existing setbacks and all that, and that's why I made the comment, we're not looking to change anything that's already hasn't been agreed to by both villages. Right? But we do understand that if in that planning that we do with the community, if whatever that use of that property ends up being, we will know that we'll need to go back to both Village of Barrington and Barrington Hills and say, here's what we're thinking, what do you think? And whatever issues come out of that. I mean, you know, look, besides any, what's legal or not, the school district has, we've always tried to operate as being good neighbors, right? So we try to work with all of our local villages and try to abide by the local codes. And in this case, we know there's a good chance that what we come up with may be different than what has already been negotiated. In this case, you know, the instruction to the group is gonna be, if you're thinking about doing something different than what's already approved, understand it's subject to the appropriate village blessing. Okay.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else just generally about schools while we're here?
I understand you're playing for the basketball championship the first time since 1979 on Wednesday night, is that correct?
It is. You gonna be there? It should be a good game.
Yeah, I'll be there.
Wow.
Got a good team.
Dr. Harrison, he's great.
Thanks, Dan.
Canadian permanent recommendation, very
This is recorded.
We can find them.
time we are going to open up public comment. Please remember, try to keep your comments to 3 minutes, and identify yourself. Your address is no longer required. I don't have a list, so I don't have to sign in list of who wants to speak, so please come forward.
My name timer out here, 3 minutes. When you have a busy schedule, I better keep on that. Start. My name is Jan Goss of the 361 South Bateman Circle. I am on your committee, your committee for the Heritage and Environs, and I've been given some responsibility for Earth Day plus 3. Earth Day plus 3 because 35 years ago, on April 22nd, we first celebrated Earth Day. And so on Saturday after Earth Day this year, it will be April 25th. So it's Earth Day plus 3. We're going to have our celebration, and we're celebrating by trying to clean up the winter trash that's collected on our corridors and beautify our corridors. So, I'm here, I think Trustee Barrington will have that in his report, but I'm here to say, please help us. Many of you have helped us in the past, please help us again. We need people. I want to clarify, we do, cleaning up the corridors is everybody's responsibility, cleaning up your property's responsibility, but some people have the misfortune of living on heavily traveled corridors, and so trying to help alleviate that burden, we try to organize a volunteer crew to help out on those very heavily traveled corridors which have a lot of trash. So we can't do everyone's road, but we're going to do the main corridors as many people as we can get to show up. Well, I think we're going to have a good turnout this year. Please, I have a sign-up sheet over here which I'll be available to help as you leave tonight. You can sign up with your name, phone number, contact information, and we'll put you on a team. Some of you can be team leaders. There's a lot of good team leaders here. And I have 1 minute and 27 seconds. I want to take off my hat for the Heritage and Environs Committee. And by the way, I'm going to point out that Pete Denise is my chairman, and that Josie Kroll is my co-chairman helping me this year. And this is a non-partisan thing. We got a lot of partisan issues. In fact, I want to speak on them for another 1 minute and 8 seconds. I got 9 items I want to talk about. So I'm taking off my Heritage and Environs hat, and I'm putting on my Jan Goss public citizen hat. And I want to point out to you who are ready for election, I'm going to be a voter. And don't be offended, and you must separate my Heritage and Environs Committee from my strongly held opinions that, please, will we just play our attorney? And I'm saying that because it's okay to disagree about whether or not the temporary attorney is the best temporary attorney, or whether the old attorney was properly relieved or quit his duties. That's okay, have that discussion. But don't we look kind of silly not paying the temporary attorney? Doesn't that look unfair? I'll tell you, it looks that way to me, and the next thing you know, we'll be in the Wall Street Journal, just like we were with the lighting ordinance thing, the front page, and they'll be reading it in Washington, and we could be a bad influence on our congressman. And heaven knows we don't want to be a bad influence on our congressman. So I'm pleading with you, and I'm going to vote based upon this issue. Pay our bloomin' temporary attorney. You don't have to like him, just pay him for what he's done. Thank you very much. I'm done.
Thank you. I'm going north to south here. The next one I've got is Dr. Barry LeCompte, is a maybe. Okay, and then moving down, I've got Linda Cools.
Yes, here. Thank you, President McLaughlin and trustees. Linda Cools. Our village is suffering from an identity crisis as to our governance. As a member of the public, we have an expectation that trustees will fairly represent, uphold our village code and ordinances, and act in our best interests. With the recent passage of the Warning Text Amendment and special counsel repeal, residents feel that a betrayal of the public trust has been committed on 2 counts. In a democracy, we agree to disagree, but respectfully and with civility. Residents are suffering through a miserable political theater, and voting is driven by personal agendas. The allegation that President McLaughlin has allowed the public to make intimidating remarks to sitting trustees is a patently false and aggressive comment
meant to cause division. Nasty posts are highlighting the president's complicity in all sorts of village matters, ranging from roads to communications and appointments. Through the fog of these staged and misdirected rants, you have badly underestimated the power and intelligence of this electorate. The record should reflect that I personally, at no time, has the president ever directed comments to the board. This is a fabrication of lies and falsehoods. Barriers for public comment should be lifted and restored, and full disclosure implemented once again. This board's policy is very exclusionary and not inclusionary. This is a trend that has continued to escalate and needs to be reversed. Accountability is the only mechanism by which residents have to keep elected officials from stepping outside the rule of law. Good stewards of good governance don't attempt to rework ordinances under a guise and then suggest that after 25 years it is an improvement on the checks and balance process. I feel that this act meets the standard of overreaching, and they accuse our president of abuse of power. The burden of proof rests with you, the board, to define a standard of legitimate actionable abuse that has been committed and not to disseminate hearsay from malcontents. The president's pledge was to unify, but that has proven to be an insurmountable task when this board votes as a bloc. This board needs to vote issue-specific and stop the rhetoric regarding Bond Dixon's remuneration and cease receiving advice from counsel for free. This fear stems from having to work with a neutral arbiter, our temporary counsel, Mr. Bond, who has nothing personal to gain from any or either outcome. The reason is control. Control is the measure why we as a village can't move issues forward and achieve resolution. And finally, the public needs to be a part of the policy process, all across the board, on all levels and all committees. Only then can we assure that our voices are heard. Elected individuals have too much power to creatively twist the policy and spend dollars to suit their agendas. The clock is ticking, and tragically, important items such as our 911 outsourcing are being tabled until another election, and then at that time we will know who will have controlling interest on the board. For now, our due diligence will be for us to keep our microscope on this board under the same criteria you placed on this president and the public you claim to serve. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Jan, you already spoke. I've got Barb count.
I am Barrington. I'm here tonight to say that, yes, delaying decisions on 911 may not seem like a popular item, and it's certainly not a political item, at least not with me. So I want to just go on record as saying that. But I do believe that there's necessary due diligence that still needs to continue to answer some of the open questions that have been made. And we have had some comments that have said that public safety would be better if we were moved to another agency. And while that may be true, there's no metrics in the study to show that we would have better service. There's still many missing costs and many items. I've said many times I'd be glad to help participate in any way I could to support getting to a resolution. But as a resident, I don't feel like I can just call a Quadcom and start investigating their center. And I'm not saying their center's bad, I'm just saying we don't have adequate metrics to tell the difference between their greatest service and our greatest service. I was able to ask some questions of Joanne, and she was very helpful, but I still have open issues that are important. I will say that we need to maintain our standard, which I believe is high, of public safety within this village while we do whatever due diligence is necessary, and not cause any harm to anyone or any resident in doing so. We do know that our wireless calls are a great deal of the calls for our network. And wireline has really dropped significantly. Joanne was able to give me approximately 50 calls a month for wireline and about close to $700 a month for wireless. But the physical configuration of how calls arrive from AT&T and what that might mean in moving over to Qualcomm are not clear to me in terms of what the service impact might be of the decisions that are moving forward. So I would just say, whatever we can do to gather the metrics that are necessary, I think would be important. Protect our existing coverage is important, and to do it with respect and due consideration. Again, not a political statement, never has been, and I just want to go on record as saying that. Thank you.
Thank you, Barb. Laura Ekstrom.
This belongs to the podium.
Well, I guess what I would talk a little bit about the podcast consolidation. Kevin mentioned at the last meeting, there are a lot of issues with the study. It's a study unlike any villages that are done because it's only one supplier, one home consolidation and cost metrics only. All other villages usually do an RFP for the consultant. Our consultant was selected by Qualcomm and presented to the village, which is highly unusual. So in spending time to go through this in detail over the last month, a few residents with a lot of expertise in this area, including Barbara Kemp and Kevin, who's a former Norwood nutrition engineer, they revealed that there was so much missing cost data, there wasn't enough information to make decisions, let alone what consolidation option or what vendor is best for us. Just for this one vendor, there wasn't enough information, and it's attempting to fill in the gaps. It was then discovered that there were over, and this is detailed in a spreadsheet, $450,000 in additional costs in the first year that were not identified in the plan. The first year costs of consolidating with Qualcomm are actually over $1 million, not $544,000 as stated in the plan. This is a pretty big error, 200%. These calculations have been, and this is not including all the costs, these are just the ones we could find metrics for to plug in. There are still some missing costs as there is a missing transition plan and a lot of other issues. These calculations, in addition to these costs, there are serious service issues that have not been addressed. We are only outsourcing 40% of our calls volume to Qualcomm. The handling of the remaining 60% of our call volume, our non-emergency calls, was not addressed, other than to recommend part-time coverage by 2 employees without calculating if this would be effective. It is now becoming clear that these calls cannot be effectively handled with 2 employees. Instead, a minimum of 3 and possibly 4 employees will be required. If this is true, we will have no cost savings and have cost increases if we consolidate with reduction in service. Reduction in service comes because many non-emergency calls, with 60% of our call volume, are not outsourced and require dispatch. And often non-emergency calls can unexpectedly turn into emergency calls. The village employees who answer these calls will now be blind and have no ability to dispatch, since they will not have the equipment to determine where the call is coming from or where the squad cars are. They will have to then call Qualcomm for dispatch, but Qualcomm will not be able to see where the call is coming from either. They will only see that the call is coming from our village hall. Then what do? Ask the caller to make another call to 911? What if they can't? No one will know where the call came from. Who wants to be the one laying on the floor and able to make a second call when that happens? Which is the issue that has been raised as the reason for having better service at Qualcomm, because they have what was called EMS, but it's truly EMD capability, emergency medical dispatch. That's a 3-day course that any employee could easily take here. And I don't think that gives as much assurance as having the ability to dispatch. This blind dispatch by Qualcomm is a real issue. And as this process has continued, there have been so many misguided misstatements that I don't know how anyone can make an informed decision. We're told Qualcomm is our current backup. I've been told that by 3 trustees, but it's CENTCOM. CENTCOM is also where our fire dispatch comes from, most of our fire dispatch. In fact, I keep hearing about all this. See the yellow? That's CENTCOM. Okay, fire dispatch. This little tiny area here is Carpentersville, where we share, service. This is a huge issue. So if the majority of our fire dispatch is covered by CENTCOM, they're telling us we're going to save money, or 40 seconds of time, by consolidating at Qualcomm. No, that would only happen if we went to CENTCOM, because then the fire comes in directly where the police comes in. The 911 call goes immediately there. So if that was the issue, well, why is this so confused? Why am I hearing such conflicting things?
Laura, can you?
So I'm gonna finish now.
Thank you.
Sorry.
No, no problem. Just want to make sure
Um,
we're all doing it.
We're also told that 5 other suburban villages have remained independent, and we're the last example. This was provided to us by Quadcom. The real story is there are 76 villages in northeastern Illinois. There's several pages of this that have remained independent.
Laura, please address
And
it.
all of the villages that have similar demographics to ours and have done $100,000 studies have the same issue as non-emergency calls, such as Kenilworth, Winnetka, and so forth. And after spending $100,000, decided not to consolidate. And as we reveal the real numbers here, we are finding it is the same story. We just had a very flawed study, broken study, and I don't want to break our security with a broken process.
Thank you. Luann Majewski.
Thank you, my name is Luann Majewski. If I may, and I have to give a copy to the village attorney, copy to Mr. McLaughlin, and I have one extra copy for a trustee, should they be interested. These might be exhibits of what I want to comment on. The first is the first page of the village website, which noticeably includes a logo that we're very familiar with. It appears frequently throughout the website and on various village documents. And also, there's a logo that is substantially similar to that logo that appears on the webpage or introductory page for an organization called Save Open Space. I have a question for the village attorney, which I hope he can answer at a later time. When I was reviewing this document, the page from the SOS, it appears that they have something very similar to the village logo. There's an attachment also. I thought that this logo, and I would like to ask the village attorney, is this logo copyrighted? It's also on the village sticker. On the front page of the village cover page, it says copyright 2013. If at a later time you can tell us if this is a copyright violation, if the emblem is not the exact village logo, which it is not exact, but substantially similar, is it still a copyright violation? I believe the village should defend the integrity of their logo. My concern is, as usual and customary for people to use the village site for many things, people are going to the site frequently when they're searching information. And of course, we see our vehicle stickers every day. I'm concerned with an organization using that logo. There may be a public perception that the organization's positions and any recommendations may be considered an endorsement by the village of Barrington Hills. And I think they are easily confused, and if it's possible, I would like at sometimes some sort of a position from the attorney or the village. Is this not a copyright violation? Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Arnold Sternick, but I'm not sure if that's a yes or no. No? Okay, thank you. Got Jean McGrell.
Sorry.
Actually, tonight's evening agenda has a lot of things I'd like to comment on, but I'm only going to comment on one, since we're time constrained. This evening, one of the board's agenda items is to vote on the dispatch outsources. I have listened to the January 20th public safety meeting, and what I appreciated about this meeting, Trustee Gould, was that the residents were able to ask questions, and then you had them answered by what it seemed the village thought were qualified people, and it was really nice to sit and be able to listen to this. As trustees, you have an important decision to make, whether it is this evening or if you table this agenda item again. Some of the items that I heard discussed at the meeting, and
I was taking them as answers to be correct. I don't have it from any place else except from your meetings, one of them was, does making the decision to join Quadcom safety first for the residents of Barrington Hills, or are we putting safety first for all of us? Well, a few of the pieces of the information that I learned from this meeting, and I'm qualifying, this is what was said at the meeting, is right now our fire and EMS calls are transferred to a call center. So when you call in for a fire or an EMS call, they have to take your information and then they have to send it to a call center. And, which I didn't know that they weren't right there taken care of. With Quadcom, the 911 is answered directly and then it is sent to the correct agency. That's one less call that you have to have. The Quadcom's responder will stay on the line until help arrives. And I understand from that meeting that we do not do that because of having only one dispatcher. And they gave an example of sometimes a person has called in and our dispatcher has to hang up and something may happen and whoever has to arrive doesn't know, they aren't able to answer the door. How to get into the home, where with Quadcom, they stay on until the help has arrived, until the person gets the help. I know I just heard that the CPR is a 3-day course. Well, our responders haven't taken that course, and if we keep it, I think they need to take that because it's important to have. Number 2, we do have a very high volume of administrative calls that they said, which are non-emergency. They were shocked. We had 12,000 last year. 2 dispatchers will be kept to handle those calls, which they were saying was fine. It's something you have to check in to decide if you agree with this. And I'm not sure what qualifies for state-of-the-art equipment, which one person had mentioned at last month's meeting, and I saw on the website that that's what we have. Because Joanne, our communications supervisor, said at the meeting, we have much that needs replacing. And I'm not going to go through all that she was saying that needed to be replaced. Even if it's good till 2018, she said they were not going to last. Also, we have one dispatcher with no backup, even though a resident disagreed with Joanne's statement. I'll go with the statement of our communications supervisor. And she said the relief for this dispatcher is sometimes not by someone who is trained to answer on the radio. So if we keep it, I would think we have to do something about that. Number 5, do we have to worry about the emergency personnel not locating the correct address? I've heard that a lot and I wonder that. But it was explained to me that the same police, fire, and ambulance personnel will be going to answer those calls that we have right now answering those calls. I didn't even look at the financial considerations because I really think that safety is the most important thing. So I hope that each trustee, when you give your vote, that you will state your reasons for how you voted, because I think a lot of information has been gotten out there. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see, Brian Mooch.
Brian Mooch, 159 Elm Road. To be brief tonight, I'd like to add or leave a letter that I'd like added to the record. This is regarding the special prosecutor investigating allegations regarding the workforce tax amendment. As we come up on election time, and we're all elected officials, and you probably like to think that you've been elected by the public and you're representing the public. Well, we base a lot of our voting decisions on your platform. And I particularly like the phraseology, I guess, of platform Unite Barrington Hills. That's very, very nice term. That's great. But here, you are in a venue now where you can put that in action. And I'm not seeing a lot of uniting going on here by either side. I look at the the previous website, and I see the incumbent called out, the previous presidential incumbent, spends nearly 9% of budget on legal fees, of which is incurred needlessly. And I see our new president's platform where he calls out and says, believes that many of these disagreements could be resolved without incurring legal fees, preserving the agreeable spirit of Barrington Hills community. Wouldn't that be nice? I don't think calling in outside legal counsel to investigate those that have dissenting views falls in line with that platform at all. And I think when you go away from that, I think you also lose a lot of the public support behind it. I look at the bottom page of that platform, the website. It says it's time to move beyond the disagreements of the past and unite Barrington Hills to move our community forward. I think no matter on what side of the fence you're on, I think that's good. We've gone through the due process with the commercial boarding exercise. We've had years of discussion on that. We've gone through the zoning board, in which it's been publicly discussed, in which drafts have been put together. And a lot of times there wasn't complete cooperation on that. Unfortunately, there were dissenting views and people that decided they did not want to cooperate in that process. Draw the line and say, either it's special use or the high road. I'm not going to participate in any other discussions other than that. And I think if you really take value in the public's opinion and the trust that they put in you as elected officials, I think you should hold to those platforms that you feel that you were voted in for and put them in place now. That's all I have for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. James Crawford, I believe.
Jim, this way. Jim, this way.
I want to speak on the subject of the upcoming vote to support the override. Then I go up to veto of the Forest Park Department. As elected officials, we are primarily responsible, both ethically and morally, to support the opinions of your constituents, namely the residents of Barrington Hills. There's no question but that the majority of the residents are against commercial use of their properties or any properties in Barrington Hills. And if there's any doubt about that opinion, it would be simple to put up the whole proposition to a vote of the residents. I doubt that the proponents of horse boarding would like to do that. So I implore you, as members of the trustees, to vote to support the community, not a special interest. Our community is important, and many of us have lived here a long time and want to preserve its nature. We're in favor of horse country, but not commercial use. Please support your constituents. Thank you.
Ted Gagan.
I'll pass, thank you.
Okay. Anyone else who would like to speak? Please come forward, David. Joe.
Thank you.
Hey, yeah, Chief, hey, why don't you co-chair?
Thank you, and I apologize for taking so long. David Holmine, I've been the neighborhood watch captain because Mike Murphy asked me in May '94, a long time ago. I have 3 topics. I have other topics, but these are so important. Number 1 is the intersection of 59 with 68 with Old Dundee Road. It's very dangerous. And since I moved there, and Mike asked me to be the neighborhood watch captain and address things that I see that need help. That intersection is so bad. So then my neighbor, Carl, who's in his 80s, had a Suburban totaled right at that intersection. Here's a guy that built the house there in the years, 50 years. So he was life flighted or taken by ambulance to Good Shepherd. 6 months later, his son-in-law is cream, and he and his daughter are both ambulance to Good Shepherd, and that Cadillac, full size, is totaled. I'm telling you, that's a very dangerous intersection. So for the residents and for you, the trustees, and everybody in the audience, please do something to fix that intersection. And work with Patty Maroney, who is fully aware of it and attends meetings with the Illinois State. We spend hundreds of millions of dollars. I don't know what they're spending them on, but this is so important. Okay, the next topic is fire signs. What had happened in 2001 is they repaved Old Dundee Road, which was nice, and I had to make a walk to everybody to sign a petition to get it paved, because Jim Kempa said maybe some people want them potholes to keep the speed down. So I walked door to door and they all signed, and then they got it repaved. Well, one of the things they did was take the fire sign out from the hosers and lay it on the ground, on the grass. Well, you know, I'm going back and forth, and I thought, wow, that shouldn't be on the grass. Where should it be? So I picked it up and I leaned it against a tree. And then I went to Barrington Fire Department. They were very, very nice, and they said, oh, well, we'll get it fixed and stuff like that. So then I had Jim Fight, who was very nice, and once a year, he'd go with me and we'd cruise the roads just in my territory, which is, you know, Old Dundee Road, and Jennifer Court, and all the Woods Road and stuff. And he would jot down the things that had to be done. So some signs were so rusty you couldn't read them, and some signs weren't there, and things like that. So in just my area, it's pretty good shape. But I'd like to address this. I talked to Jeff Swanson, and he decided to make the decision, well, we're not going to have anybody go with me to look at this again once a year. I think it's so important. It's not proper to require our police and firemen who are speeding like crazy to some emergency to then jot down if there's a missing sign. I'll address you to Scott Road, east and west, has 2 horse operations going, and the one, Blue Sky, doesn't even have a fire sign. And those people are so nice that operate it. If there's a fire down there and if people are affected, or horses or something, that's going to get the front page. So I'd like you to think about Scott Road, east and west. West one has a huge horse operation. Now, I'm more attentive to the east side, so I'll let you investigate and see what to do on that. The third topic is we have a mosque here, which they got the occupancy permit on December 22nd, 2001. And I went to the meeting beforehand because I wanted to meet these Egyptians and make sure I changed the business cards with them and stuff like that. They were so happy to meet me. And they had 4 rough talking, short lawyers from Washington, D.C. So what I did, knowing this meeting was showing up, the day before I went to Jim Kempa, I sat with him. Jim and I are good friends. He's unfortunately passed. And I said, Jim, these are Muslims, and I'm used to dealing with them because I had an office in Baghdad, Iraq, Cairo, Egypt, Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and Sydney, Australia. I had Shiites and Sunnis reporting to me. And I said, you have to be very careful because they're very, very, they're touchy. And so what he does is he starts the meeting, he raises his hands, he says, well, now the next on the agenda is the prayer house. I don't know what that is, I know what a church is. And so then one of the lawyers stood up, out of turn, and stood up. He said, I see where this is going. He says, if you guys don't approve this occupancy permit tonight, in my briefcase, I'm going to file in Washington, D.C. that you're against Muslims. And you know what? All the trustees signed right there. Now, since that time, they changed from a prayer house to a mosque. I'm the only guy, I guess, in Barrington Hills that cares about this. In a mosque, you can marry a 10-year-old girl to a 60-year-old Muslim. It's allowed. And there's other things you can do. And I'd like to please address this because I feel bad. I'm the only guy in Barrington Hills that knows there's a mosque there. Thank you so much.
David, thank you. If there's anyone else that would like to address the board, please come forward.
Thank you so much.
I have something friendly
Great.
to say.
Great. Come forward, please.
Thank you. I did say yes on what I said, okay. Peter Denise, Israel. I just wanted to ask, please, that when we have our new volunteer elected and non-elected appointed people coming up in the next several months, could we go back to the old format where we had a training day or training hours to actually teach people what OMA means and what happens with FOIA and how to do their jobs and how to conduct meetings? Because I know in my committee I have a new person. I'm hoping to gather at least another new appointed person, and they should have that training option that was offered to me all those years ago. And in fact, we would have at least one new trustee that will be on, if maybe more, I don't know. But that would be nice if they were trained, and even President McLaughlin, you didn't have the benefit of the training either. So could we go back to that?
No, I did actually.
Yeah, but not our village training. You didn't have our in-house village training. Mr. Cosen's training is not count. No, that doesn't count.
You're making a supposition.
That doesn't count.
Thank you, though.
That's all.
Thank you. Okay. Any further comments? With none being heard, we'll move forward. Approval of the minutes. At this time, the chair would entertain a motion to approve the minutes from the meeting December 18th, 2014.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion, any changes? Any questions?
I did actually have something. On the 10th, or the 9th page, there's a section, it's about the middle of the page, it says, Trustee Barrington at this time read his statement regarding this issue, and it says this statement has been included in an attachment to the board documents, which it is attached. And I think the record needs to reflect President McLaughlin at that time stated that he would include the allegations contained in Trustee Harrington's statement in the list of allegations alleged improprieties of the special investigator.
December 18th. This is December 18th, Joe, that we're discussing, not January meetings.
I am, you're right.
Yeah, so I think yeah, this is December 18th.
I apologize.
Is there any changes for the December 18th? Any further questions on December 18th? With none being heard, first we take the roll.
Trustee Harrington?
Yes.
Trustee Concept?
Yes.
Trustee Maloney?
Yes.
Trustee Sullivan? Yes. Trustee Messer?
Yes.
Trustee Gould?
Yes.
President McLaughlin?
Yes, thank you. Moving forward, item 1-2, which would be the approval of the January 26, 2015 meeting. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
And discussion?
I'll just read it in my statement.
And motion, Joe, I'm sorry, I didn't.
It's the section, middle of the section, middle of page 9 in a section pertaining to your appointment of the special counsel. And if you recall, and it is attached, Trustee Barrington read his statement regarding this issue. It included several allegations of alleged impropriety pertaining to yourself. And you said during that time, I read, you said in multiple, I think I counted 3 times that those allegations, those alleged improprieties would be included in the charge of the special counsel to investigate.
Be more than happy to include those, Joe. So what's your question as
So
amending the language here?
the meeting minutes should reflect that you agreed that these allegations contained in trustee Harrington's statement would be included in the investigation by special counsel.
Yeah, I don't think there was a disagreement, so.
But it doesn't say that. It needs to say that.
Would you add that to ours, please? Great.
Also, I requested repeatedly the written statement that you read into the record, public record, and it has not yet been turned into the
It
village.
was provided to the clerk a number of weeks ago, Sandy, so I would suggest you contact Dolores. It was provided, I think, early in January. And so the clerk's had it for quite some time, so we can get that to you.
I was asking Mr. Combs, so.
Okay.
You have it?
Any other changes? With none being,
That should probably be attached to these minutes.
Yeah,
which should be
The letter
attached to the minute.
that you read.
the statement you read into the record.
Would we not attach it to the December 15th, right? Wouldn't that be more accurate? Yeah.
That, the statement you read at the December 15th, we know. The statement you read at the January 26th
Oh,
meeting
okay, thank you.
has
Yes,
not,
Patty.
we're talking about two separate documents.
Yes, that was actually provided as well, to
Yeah.
the clerk, so, okay.
So
Yeah,
Dolores,
yeah,
you have the
yeah, I
statement for
agree.
January
Got it.
26th?
Yes, she does. Thank you. So with those additions, can you get a motion to have those additions?
So moved.
Second. And Dolores, you have the specifics on that?
Okay, good.
Okay. Dolores, please take the roll.
Trustee Harrington?
Yes.
Trustee Concept?
Yes.
Trustee Moroni?
Yes.
Trustee Selman? Trustee Messer?
Yes.
Trustee Gold?
Yes.
President Gonzalez?
Yes, thank you. Item 1.3, vote on the minutes of the executive session, January 26, 2015. Yes, Mr. Bond?
Items 3 and 4 would be deferred until after executive session, so it would be my recommendation that at the point in time in the agenda at the end that when the board is going into executive session, you should recess into executive session and defer those items under item 1 on the agenda, subparagraph 3 and 4 until that time.
Okay. And then come back out and vote on that. Thank you. So with consent of the board, we'll move forward. Items 2.1, the village treasurer's report. Karen?
I make a motion to accept the treasurer's report for January 2015.
Second. You moved and seconded, Fritz? I think we need.
Second.
Karen moved.
Karen, great. Any discussion? With none being heard, Dolores, please take the roll.
Trustee Harrington?
Yes.
Trustee Concept?
Yes.
Trustee Moroni?
Yes.
Trustee Selman?
Yes.
Trustee Messer?
Yes.
Trustee Gold?
Yes.
President Gonzalez?
Yes, thank you.
I make a motion to accept the police pension board report for January 2015.
Second.
Any discussion? A couple of things that I think we need to bring up. First of all, is Rosemary here?
She is.
Rosemary, if you come forward. So we actually had a study done on our police pension fund that was to give us an estimate relative to the discussions that we've been having in both, I believe it was in finance committee meetings, and we've had a number of discussions on the village board. So I wanted to make sure in this section we didn't talk about it with bill payment, because we're going to be approving something that we've done a study on, but I think we need to be aware of what the results were relative to what the obligation of the village is moving forward on our police pension fund.
I know the idea was to possibly bond out for the funding of the unfunded liability for the police pension fund. The results of that study showed that without bonding out at all, the village would pay about $31 million through 2040. If we did bond it out, the village would pay about $27 million through 2040.
And that was with the return assumption, which is the target assumption of 6.5%.
Yes, assumption rate. So it's about $120,000 to $140,000 a year that could potentially be saved. I'm sorry? The numbers, if we did bond out.
And let's explain to the public, what bond out means if we were to issue a bond to raise $7.5 million to invest today for the next 25 years.
To fund the pension.
To fund the pension, make it 100% funded, and use the proceeds to the benefit of the pension fund and to make escrow payments into an account that would be payable to the bond at the end of 25 years. So bonding out is essentially.
Yes, through 2040. If we were to bond it out, the village would pay about $27 million through 2040. If we were to do nothing and continue to pay as we're actuarially required every year, it would be about $31 million. And that's using the target rate of return assumption of 6.5% for the bond.
So
Could save about $120,000 to $140,000 a year.
So in present value terms, we're looking at about $1.8 million in savings and roughly $3.8 million in savings if we hit the 6.5% rate. If we continue along the 5% return, which is about what we've been doing, Mike, which we've been talking about for some time, we're talking about a $43 million liability to the village over those 25 years. So this is the first time I think we've had a study that's given us an accurate forecast of what the liability, the total liability is for the Village of Barrington Hills as it relates to the police pension fund moving forward.
And this is obviously if no changes to the police force occur.
Correct, that's
for the
without.
totals.
Correct.
Question?
Yes.
You're, basically what you're saying, and I don't understand some of this, but if we do 100%, correct?
If you
Bonded out means you're doing the whole thing, correct?
$7.5 million, we're underfunded by $7.5 million.
All right. By 2040, we only have to be 90% funded.
That's correct.
Why don't we, can we also see what it looks like for that also? You know, I mean, so it's like apples and apples, so to speak?
Yeah, well, the target that you want is always 93, 94, because within that year, the expected rate of return is 6.5, so 100 means you'll be at 106 if you, so
I
that's the
understand,
issue.
I understand what you're saying, it's just a question.
If the benefit is that substantial, then why wouldn't you just go ahead and?
No, I understand that, I was just looking at apples and apples, that's all.
Yeah, and so it's a good question, Fritz. What was kind of alarming when that number of 43 million with the current 5% return is something that I don't think we were even aware of the 31 million. These numbers are, these are astronomical numbers that we have to start from a budgeting perspective, rolling into our annual expectations, because they're gonna keep going up and up. And so raising the money today, I think the issuance would be at 3 3/4% is one of the bids that we have from one of the advisors that we've talked with. And so every year that the village would return on that money more than 3 3/4%, there's an advantage to the taxpayers that we don't have to then fund that money. So that's where the projected
No, I
savings.
understand exactly what you're saying, I just was looking at it at a different angle, so to speak.
Yeah, it's not a simple issue that can be discussed, but there's a lot of assumptions here. But again, the assumption is that I think there's a 5% pay increase estimate, which is a normal estimate in all public pension plans. That doesn't mean that everyone's getting 5% raise next year. It's just a normal, and there's an estimate that we'll be staying at the same numbers from a police force. And I think for our community, unlike others, it's not like we have building permits to the point where we can expect to have significant growth.
You're starting to turn me over to your side on this.
Why, there's no side, it's just.
Well, what I'm getting at is I'm leaning more and more towards what you're saying. At the beginning, I was not, I didn't understand it, and I'm understanding it more is what I'm saying.
And Mike, we talked about this. I mean, you've got negative interest rates, which is incredible in other countries, and we're at 0 in overnight Fed funds rate. It can get a lot more advantageous than that from timing perspective. So this could be a decision we need to consider that could have significant savings on an annual basis for the village.
Makes sense.
So, we don't have to make a decision tonight, but I think it's important since we just paid for a study that we make the residents aware of this.
But interest rates are going up, everybody knows that, so if we are gonna take action on it, it seems to make sense to do it sooner than later.
Yeah, the good news is, for us, is that this would take, Rosemary, I can't remember what.
It's about a 90-day process.
Correct.
When you say 90-day
From start to finish and issuing bonds, there's a lot of steps involved.
And we would have to engage a financial advisor, we'd have to engage a firm to issue the bond, and I don't believe that we've done enough analysis on what the cost would be for both. We were just doing this as the beginning process, trying to estimate the
Very
liability.
Well,
stage here.
if the Fed increases, it's the rate, it's gonna probably happen in June. So that's gonna be the first step from what I read. So I don't know that we're gonna be able to meet that if we're talking about 90 days. So the problem is we've got a moving target once that occurs. So it's seems to me that we should move quickly on this.
Yeah, and I think the last time we talked was December. We had a conference call in December. So they were quoting a 3 3/4% municipal issuance, and that's the important number, is what we could issue the debt.
When they do that, are they projecting that it's going to be 90 days before they get, are they factoring in what they expect to be the increase?
Yeah, they usually do, but there is, well, not good news. The good news is I think you're right, about 3 or 4 months ago, everybody's predicting that, but based on how the economy's going right now, everyone's predicting flat. It's more flat than it was, Joe, but I agree with you. If we're interested in doing this, we should get some specific numbers, specific costs, and consider this, because, you know, 120 to 140,000 annual savings over time is a significant number to the village. Particularly since the state has just come out under their LGDRF and told us that we potentially could expect, out of the 417,000 we received from the distribution fund, it could be cut in half under the governor's current proposal. So we've got a lot of moving parts here. If you can save money, find a way to do that, I think it's doubly important.
Rosemary, can you remind us, have we paid off the bond pertaining to
The 2003 bond, no, that will be paid off in 2020.
And who did the study?
Lauterbach and Eman, the actuary,
You can get a copy of
these
the study.
pension funds, yes, and
I
their bill
think we
is
probably should
included in
have
those for approval.
copies of
I
these numbers and.
Did you distribute that, or did you, the findings from Lauterbach, did you distribute the information?
No, I don't think so.
No.
Okay.
We can now.
Yeah, yeah.
We need to do that.
And then the firm that we talked to was
William Blair.
William Blair, was the firm that would act in the issuance capacity or the advisory capacity, and then we would have to, I would suggest we for a couple other places, just to see what it's.
The other side of the equation, and I need to study this thing, but the other side of the equation is whenever you add leverage, you can magnify your returns, but you can also magnify the downside. And so when you assume a 5% or a 6% rate of return, that assumes that every year it's 6%. And the real world doesn't work that way. The real world works like this. You know, if over time, with the stock market, it's sort of like a guy bouncing a ball walking up the steps. You know, if you watch the ball, it's crazy, but if you watch the guy going up the steps, he's making progress. But there's not such thing as an even return year in, year out. So that volatility that's in there complicates strategies like this. So if you have an up year and you've borrowed money, it magnifies the up year, but you also have the down year. So if you have a 3 3/4% interest rate and you get a 10% down year, you have a 13 3/4% down. And it also matters when those down years occur. If those down years occur in the early years, then that creates this problem where you have to make up you have a smaller amount of principal that you have to get even higher returns in a later year to make up for those low returns in the early years. So there's a lot of timing issues. And as I've said in these meetings before, there's no such thing as a free lunch. And predicting interest rates is a very difficult thing to do. Even the so-called, bond daddies and the bond experts and the gods of bonds, they're frequently wrong.
Well, the report that we got did have different assumed rates from 3 to 5 to 6.5 to 7%, and that came all in the report, and I'll definitely provide that.
But those are 3 scenarios of positive returns every single year, which doesn't exist. And you can have, so no one say we have the bond market that we say, well, interest rates are at all-time high or at all-time low, so next big move, which is probably right, will be interest rates will go up. But that's been predicted now for many years. So it's a question of when. We've got 20 years in Japan where interest rates have stayed at negative real interest rates. So, if we end up like Japan, we could be in this scenario for a long, long time. And the other side of the coin is, so you can also have years where the bond market does poorly, and so does the stock market. So you have, if you're marking your bond position to market, you have a deterioration in your bond position, and you also have deterioration in your stock position. So you get a double whammy. And under the new accounting rules, we're going to have to account for both of those. So I'm not saying I'm against this. I'm just saying there's pros and cons to this that we need to understand and need to study this thoroughly. Because once you issue bonds, $7.5 million, the bond investors, if you miss an interest payment, you're in default. If you miss a pension plan payment, as demonstrated by the brilliant people that run our state, you continue to run. You're not, you know, there's rules around what you're supposed to do, but you can miss an interest, you can miss a pension payment without having, you know, the court shut you down. So you have a little bit more flexibility there, whereas in a bond payment, you have no flexibility. You have to make those interest payments and those principal payments year in and year out of your fund in default.
Rosemary, does the Lauterbach report talk about pros and cons like Mike was?
There is a memo from, I believe it was William Blair, working in collaboration with Lauterbach and Neiman. Everyone's kind of working together, trying to piece some type of scenarios that the village board can look at and see if there was interest. That's why it hasn't really been presented yet, because I wasn't sure what the interest was and didn't want to muddle you with a 50-page report on something that we weren't sure if it was going to be interest, you know, that there was the interest in it.
It's something we should look into, and again, I'm gonna repeat, I've said it several times, I'm not against it, I just wanna make sure that, you know, we balance the pros and the cons, and we thoroughly understand this, before we do it, because again, $7.5 million in debt is on our balance sheet, and that's irreversible. You can refinance it, you can pay it off, but to pay it off, you gotta get $7.5 million of revenue somewhere to pay it off.
Well, yeah.
Those interest payments come every 6 months.
Well, so how it works right now is we have an escrow payment for normalized pension costs, which is about $310,000. And then what we're paying is we're paying an amortized cost for the balance, the $7.5 million we don't have in the plan. That's increasing by about $40,000 to $60,000 per year. Like, so what you do in this scenario is you end up getting the funds in advance, which is the bond proceeds, you put them into the investment program that's mandated by the state.
I understand how it works, but
Well, let me finish.
Keep going.
So what you end up with, the second part of that cost is rather than amortizing what you don't have in the plan, you escrow those assets into a fund, so at the end of the term of the bond, that you've got the money there to pay the bondholders. So the benefit to this village is we aren't bonding to make current payments. We're bonding to basically not have to pay the amortization costs. So other communities need to do this to make their current payments. We don't have that problem. So there's an advantage.
Part of its current payments were bonded. It's good, what you're fulfilling is a whole, yeah.
Correct, yeah, right, Joe, that's correct. I mean, essentially, right now, we're at like $700,000 on an annual basis that we contribute. 689,000, I think, to be exact. But 310 is the normalized cost. That would still be due to the taxpayer. But the other part of that, 689, is what we're putting in to catch up on the monies that we don't have.
And that's what you avoid.
Yeah, so instead of that money going to amortize, you're putting that money into an escrow account to have the bond payment ready at the end of 25 years. So the numbers aren't that dissimilar, but the advantage to the community is if you make more than 3 3/4%. And you're right, Mike, but you know, historically, you've got to look at where we are as it relates to the markets. And I'm not going to sit here and go through that tonight, but I think it's important from a timing perspective that we give this serious consideration moving forward, because it can save the village millions of dollars over a period of time. And I think that's, with what's going on with everything else in the state, I think if we can do that, we should have serious consideration of it. And I'd say over the next 3 months, no longer than 6, we should probably start moving down that path.
Board gives me direction, anyone gives me direction.
So that's
Ball
what.
rolling, I shall do so.
So we'll get the William Blair.
They need the information.
I need to get the information for sure.
Okay. Any further discussion, questions on the return?
Well, I think it certainly noted that it's not without any risk, and that was the point that I was going to bring up, of what is the risk? And secondly is, it's so uncertain as to what, we know what the governor would like to do, but it's uncertain as to what is going to happen, what the legislature's going to do. So we should know that in the next few months, and how that's going to impact our financial standing. So I think that has to be taken into account as we talk about doing anything.
Yeah, and the history will be that'll be the only thing you can rely on is the last 10 years, 15 years, 20 years as it relates to plans like this, and there's no guarantee the future's gonna look like the past.
Yeah.
The one thing we do know is that 0% interest rates are the overnight rate, unless we go into negative interest rate, is probably wrong. And I think that we could take advantage of that, but we'll have to get more information, so.
Okay.
Any further discussion? We're on the police pension board's report.
Okay, yes.
Trustee Concept?
Yes.
Trustee Maloney?
Yes.
Trustee Sullivan?
Yes.
Trustee Wessner?
Yes.
Trustee Bull?
Yes.
Hoffman?
Yes, thank you.
I make a motion to approve the overtime report from January 16, 2015 to February 15, 2015 for a total of $6,970.53.
Second. Is there any discussion? Chief, anything you'd like to add?
We have the Martin Luther King holiday for 47.63 hours. Illnesses for 31.5, but we were still under the monthly budgeted amount. So we're doing good.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Dolores, please take the roll.
Trustee Barrington?
Yes.
Trustee Concept?
Yes.
Trustee Maloney?
Yes.
Trustee Sullivan?
Yes.
Trustee Wessner?
Yes.
Trustee Bull?
Yes.
President Hoffman?
Yes, thank you.
I make a motion to approve the bills for the month of January 16th through February 15th, 2015, totaling $298,993.59.
Is there a second? Just a second. Any discussion?
I'm again interested in amending the motion to exclude Von Dixon invoices for village attorney. So we can, last time we voted on one, and then we voted on the other.
Can I ask if there's a specific reason why you?
I've already discussed it, and I'm not gonna discuss it again, you know perfectly why, perfectly, it's been explained several times.
Okay, so, just to clarify, you're not voting to exclude them based on any questions with the bills themselves and the work that has been performed?
Correct, it's related to how they were appointed. It goes back for 6 months and more, actually it goes back almost a year. Should not be a surprise.
Any further comments?
So the invoice that would be included would be the ZBA invoice, and I think it's number 14571.
Correct. Okay, that's correct.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's excluding, so it brings us to a total of, correct me if I'm wrong, we're at $237,341.09.
Correct.
And Rosemary, can you give us some clarity on the Prompt Payment Act in the state of Illinois and what we might be putting ourselves into as far as not paying Von Dixon in a timely manner?
We would most likely be liable to pay that with fees or penalties.
There's a home rule community, we're allowed to choose which bills we pay and don't pay, it's part of our village code. I would also argue that Mr. Bond is a very sophisticated, very savvy, very street smart man. He's had several months to consider this. The fact that he's decided to continue to do work for the village without getting paid is really a judgment he made on his own. And he put himself at risk.
Mr. Bond, do you have any opinion on the Prompt Payment Act and what liability it may place on the village?
Yeah, the Prompt Payment Act, whether you're a home rule municipality or a non-home rule municipality, applies to governmental entities, both villages, cities, park districts, library districts, school districts. The Prompt Payment Act requires that any invoices submitted to the governmental entity are reviewed and that payment is made within 30 days of the receipt of either the goods or services that are provided for under the Prompt Payment Act. There is a mechanism under the Prompt Payment Act if you take issue with that particular invoice, you have to put the vendor on notice that there is a concern or issue with that invoice. The services were not provided, the services were not performed pursuant to a contract, and that allow you to, once you put that vendor on notice, to extend that period of time and attempt to resolve that dispute. And then after the period of 60 days, and then if there is a resolution, then the matter of bills to be paid. There is, as was indicated, there is a provision in there for penalties and so forth if that's not paid.
I mean, you would agree that you did not notice as to what this board views as the problem as to why these bills are not being paid. So I don't think there's any question about lack of notice.
Prompt Payment Act requires written notice, this, and while I have been put on notice as to the basis for not paying, as I opined, I take an issue with the legal basis for withholding of payment.
And there's a contrary legal opinion regarding that issue, and that's how the courts, that's what the courts are charged with doing. If you choose to sue the village over your bill, there's gonna be a determination as to whether you were properly appointed or whether you took the risk and you undertook the work without being properly appointed. So that's what's gonna be decided at that point.
Mr. Cozen, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Adequate summary, the treasurer has kept a tally to date, reported to Elizabeth I. We are at the crossroads of deciding what to do next with this matter.
Well, I think that we have discussed this ad infinitum in our meetings the last 6 or 7 months, and there's ample public record about this, so that there really shouldn't be any question about what the issue is. It's an issue of the improper manner in which it was done in the process, and subverting the process. And I think that there should not be any question about that. Perhaps the trustees should put together a written statement, since apparently it's advisable to do so, regardless of the fact that we have had so much discussion that is in the minutes, in the record, and has been recorded.
Any further discussion?
I mean, one of the things, it'd be great if I had independent, unbiased village counsel that could provide me with counsel on this. I don't have that. And that's one of the critical issues here. And that's what I brought into question since day one. I've been consistent on that. Nothing against you personally. I feel bad for you. I don't know why you're still here, honestly. I think you're a very smart, savvy guy, street smart guy. I think you're taking an educated businessman's risk, and that's your risk.
And I too agree. I mean, this needs to be resolved. I mean, we have work to do. We need opinion. Yes, I totally agree. Can we come to agreement that we go back to our RFP process that we started and put in place and finish that and resolve this once and for all? Would you agree to that, Marty?
I agree that I'll nominate who I think is best qualified for the Village of Barrington Hills to give unbiased advice, which I've done that. The board's chosen not to appoint them. And until...
Is that a no?
Yeah, that would be, I'll continue to nominate the person that I believe is in the best interest of the
Well, then
Village of
why do
Barrington
we do
Hills.
the RFP in the first place?
Yeah,
If that's the case.
Absolutely, that's what was described, and we went over that, and the RFP process was something that was created by the village trustees, and in the first meeting I stated that at the end of that, we aren't going to change, which we'll get into later, about changing the form of government and what the final rule was, which is that the village president, under our current form of government, has the right to make the nomination. And the attempt to change that, which we stated from the first day that we're in here, that would be retained in whatever procedure was created, and it was retained. So at this time, I would suggest that relative to the Prompt Payment Act and liability coming to the village with expenses that are unnecessary, I would direct council to go for a quantum meritum payment, and I would actually suggest you go in that direction.
So you're asking the village attorney to sue the village, is basically what you're
I'm
asking.
asking the village attorney to recover his payment.
Right, you're asking him to sue the
whatever
village.
form
I
he
would say
believes
you're
is
more
necessary.
asking, I'd say you're encouraging.
You're directing him to.
My
That's
opinion
right.
is
Which isn't really
a violation
consistent
of
with your...
fiduciary duty.
Well, also it's consistent with your repeated statements
Let
that
me
you're
make sure
taking
everyone heard that. I
attorney's
think
fees.
that's a violation of your fiduciary duty.
I think that we've got an issue here relative to increased expense. Mr. Cozen, any further comment?
No, I think, let's be clear about something. When the village president utters the words quantum merit, what he means is an equitable action in chancery court. That's what quantum merit means. And the only way you go to, you do that is to file a lawsuit against the village. So what you just heard the village president say is he's encouraging the village, or Mr. Bond here, to file a lawsuit against the village, rather than respecting the wishes of the trustee to follow the process that we've established to select a village attorney.
And you may have the right to appoint, but with our approval.
No, I have the right to nominate,
To nominate.
and you have the right to.
Not to approve.
Correct.
Well, that's what we did, we did not approve.
Absolutely, that's
So
correct.
there we are.
It
We're-
wasn't
question I have,
an
Mr. Bond.
RFP that anybody was willing to approve, any of the other firms that were up in the first instance. Does anybody here have a problem with Bond Dixon's bills? That's my question. Is anybody, Rosemary's been giving us the itemized bills, does anybody have an issue with
Yes.
the work that they have done?
Absolutely,
Yes,
it's
I
not
do.
authorized work. The whole premise of the bills is a problem.
The actual work product, the time that was put in,
Absolutely.
anything like that?
They shouldn't
Yeah.
be working on village matters when they're not properly appointed as village attorney. That's my opinion.
Do you have anything other than that, any problem other than that with?
The only question I have, and I think Mr. Bond brought it up, he mentioned contract. I don't think we have a contract with Bond Dixon. Or do we need a contract? I don't know, you brought up the word contract, and that's the reason why I'm throwing it back out there.
Mr. Ryan, would you like to?
Yeah, I believe that was in the context of the Prompt Payment Act. There isn't a contract, you generally would not, in our experiences, you don't have a written contract. You are appointed, there's a process for appointment, there's a process for removal. So generally, in the municipal arena, there is not a quote-unquote written contract, which is consistent.
And municipal, you're saying?
Right.
All right.
So is there an amended number, Mike, that you want for the bills?
Well, excuse me, last time we voted on the original
Yeah,
amendment.
understood.
Or, I'm sorry, the original motion, and then we voted on amending the motion.
So
I'll
is
be
there?
happy to amend the motion that.
No, you're right, we'll go ahead. So there was a second to Karen's motion to approve, I think it was by you, Mike, correct?
I made the motion.
To approve the bills as currently
Right,
presented.
and Mike seconded.
I don't think I seconded it.
I'm
Patty did,
I
okay.
seconded.
Any further discussion? None being heard, Dolores, please take the roll.
Are we doing that first?
I'm sorry? We're voting to approve the bills as presented, correct, in total.
Trustee Harrington?
No.
Trustee Constance?
Yes.
Trustee Moroni?
What are we're approving with the?
original.
As submitted.
No.
Trustee Sullivan?
No.
Trustee Messer?
No.
Trustee Gould?
Yes.
President McLaughlin?
Yes, thank you, does not pass. Now, Karen, I think you've got another motion you'd like to make?
I make a motion to approve the bills for the month of January 16, 2015 to February 15, 2015, for a total of $237,341.09.
And what does that include?
That is, that eliminates,
It eliminates the Bond Dixon bills with the exception of
With the exception of the
14-14571.
correct, correct.
I'll second that.
Any discussion?
Yes. I see there are $20,000 in here, and all of a sudden, we've got FOIAs. I have yet to see any FOIAs coming through like we used to. What's going on?
Mr.
Mr.
Cozen
President?
sent a FOIA report.
There is a
to
FOIA
That came,
report.
but it didn't come till 2 o'clock this afternoon.
I'm sorry?
He sent an email with the FOIA report today.
Well, obviously,
I wouldn't have gotten it.
I'm on the prep list, because I surely did.
You're on the snail mail?
I'm on this. Honestly, I've yet to see anything about a FOIA in the
Mr. Cozen,
last
this is
6
yours,
months.
if you could clarify for trustee Gold, I'd appreciate it.
It's the same report, there's been no change, it's the same status report.
Well, that's not true, because we used to get them here in the meetings. We used to get copies of what was going on in monthly meetings.
It's in the January packet, no changes occurred, and I'll break out the details. But the distribution is that there is no action from the report.
So I'm the pain of mind list, I guess. Mr. Bond and I are on the pain of mind list.
All right, moving forward, any further discussion?
Yeah.
It's been a while.
He sent it.
I know, I saw it today, but it's been a while.
Well, I will restate.
Thank you.
I think that's an issue with the administrator, so I take it up with him.
That's what I'm asking.
Thank you. Any further questions? None being heard, Dolores, please take the roll.
Trustee Harrington?
Yes.
Trustee Constance?
No.
Trustee Moroni?
Yes.
Trustee Sullivan?
Yes.
Trustee Messer?
Yes.
Trustee Gould?
Yes.
President McLaughlin?
No. Okay, moving forward. Thank you, Karen. Roads and Bridges.
Okay.
Monthly report, Patty.
You got my report in your packet. It's a fairly complicated session we had this month because we have a lot on the agenda. However, I think if you go through there, we first off will start with the local function classification map, which we have had redrawn, redone. Dan, you want to come speak to some of these things? Because Dan was very much in attendance this month. So these maps have been redone, the roads have been reclassified, and the village map has been changed. And I have additional copies here that Dan brought tonight to show that they have been done as the resolutions instructed. The next thing on our report.
Patty, can we be specific on that?
Okay, we have changed, Dan, we changed Spring Creek Road.
Well, the map has been prepared to demonstrate the classifications as they exist in the comprehensive plan. So the majority of the village, the local roads are classified in the comprehensive plan as local service roads. That's the classification that's reflected on these maps.
Thank you.
Okay, so that's done. Then we have, as discussed at our earlier meetings and we discussed last month at our board meeting, the 2015-2019 road program recommendations. And Dan had presented a study, and last year there was a pavement condition report which you prepared. And based on that, we have received a detailed recommendation and breakdown based on various criteria of how we are going to go forward with our road program. And we actually, Dan prepared a number of different possibilities, and I asked him to break it out a little more because it is, even for us working on it and trying to sit and compare it, it's complicated. And there's a lot to consider, as we just discussed with the possibility of bonds. And how do you look into the future? And where the interest rate's going? Well, as Dan has recommended, when you start going forward with a road plan, conditions can change rather quickly, situations change quickly, and farther out you go, the more problematic it becomes of what you're going to have 7, 8, 9 years from now. So Dan, I'm going to let you briefly go through and explain what you prepared for this recommendation.
There's some summary information included in your packet. There's three main topics I'd like to hit on. First is duration. Based on the discussion that occurred in January, we prepared plans of three different durations. So the 5-year, which is what we initially recommended with our pavement condition study, a 7-year plan and a 10-year plan, depending on how far down the road we'd like to show. The second is, for each of those, the 5, the 7, and the 10, there's two approaches that are possible. One is what we'll characterize as a maintenance approach, which is to resurface 3.2 miles of roadway per year on average. Some years a little more, some years a little less. But 3.2 miles roadway resurfacing per year. And where we came up with that, there's a lot of different road types in the village. The list of roads that the village maintains ranges from somewhat heavily traveled roads such as Ridge Road, Ridge Road, Plum Tree Road, Helm Road. Those higher volume roads really need resurfacing every 10 years or so. There's some lower volume roads that are still through roads. Those would be like Oak Knoll or Old Hart, 7 to 1,000 ADT. Those are roads that typically you want to resurface every 12 years or so. And then there are cul-de-sac roads, which may have a couple hundred cars a day or even less. Those roads, typically what we found is you can resurface every 15 years or so and be all right. You develop a weighted average based on all those different road types to come up with
an average surface life of about 12 years, and dividing the 39 miles of village-maintained roads by that 12 years, we get 3.2 miles of road resurfacing per year. So that's the first approach, would be to average 3.2 miles of roadway per year. Basically, you're just keeping pace with maintenance. The second approach would be more of an accelerated approach to try and improve overall paving conditions. So in our paving condition study, we talked about a backlog. You know, for several years leading up to this past year, we fell short of that target of 3.2 miles of resurfacing per year as an average. And calculating that out, that turns out to be about 4.5 miles of road. And so this accelerated approach, the goal was to get back up to the pace that we started at and get an extra 4.5 miles of resurfacing done over the first 5 years of the program. So each of the three potential options, the 5-year, the 7-year, the 10-year, with the accelerated approach, you're still pursuing that extra 4.5 miles in the first 5 years, and then for the 7 and the 10-year, it goes back to that 3.2 miles per year average. So those are the two approaches that we took. So that's 6 options total, kind of a 1A, 1B, 1C, 2A, 2B, 2C. The one other topic I'll hit is jurisdiction. So appended to our memo, there's a list of all the roads in the village and what jurisdiction they are. So we're just talking about the village maintained roads. Within Barrington Hill, there's about 25 miles of private roads. There's about 20 miles maintained by the state of Illinois, and there's about 19 miles maintained by the Cook County Highway Department. So what we're talking about tonight is just the 39 miles of road maintained by the village.
Question, Dan, if I may. What's bothering me is you seem like these roads are breaking down sooner than they should be. Is it weather, or is it the way they are mixing the roads that they're putting, mixing the asphalt that they're putting down?
Well, we've had a bad couple of winters. I think that's a piece of it. Part of it's just the majority of the roads in Barrington Hills were never built to an engineering standard. They weren't subdivision roads that were constructed
Right, all
with
gravel,
subdivision.
gravel first.
Started out as gravel and then chip and seal, and then you built up over the top of that.
Sure.
So because of that, a lot of the higher volume roads, especially, that's true, that they started as gravel roads. So like at Hager's Bend, that's, perception is that's breaking down pretty quickly, but actually the last time that was resurfaced was 2003. So we're at the 12-year mark right now, and a couple of years beyond what we'd really like to target to resurface acres.
Now, obviously, thinking outside the box here, the best way to do it would go down and start totally over, but then your cost is just astronomical.
Right, from an engineering standpoint, we'd love to do that and have a more reliable base on which to build, but as you mentioned, that is a higher cost associated.
Now, if we did, now you're saying what, it's 2.5 miles of roads?
3.2 is what we're...
3.2. What I'm thinking is maybe we go less and dig down more. So, instead of doing 3.2, maybe we do 2.2 and maybe get it. So we have a better base. The base is what we got to worry about, and that's what's deteriorating.
It would give you more time, on the far end. So I mean, for instance, Hager's Bend Road, if we're just resurfacing, you probably only have another 8, 9, 10 years before you're going to have to do that again to reconstruct from the base up on that road or Ridge Road or any other higher volume road. That would give you an extra couple of years before you have to worry about maintenance on the back end. My concern would be all the roads that are pretty close to breaking down now, and
Yeah,
if
I
you
got
want to
you.
get in
All right,
2.2.
understand.
Next year and the year after,
Because you're just scraping the top off anyway when you're redoing a new road, correct?
in some cases, leaving it in place. If the surface is still in good enough condition,
Yeah.
we can just resurface over the top of it and just patch there.
Hager's Bend as an example. Now, this Hager's Bend in for this year?
Hager's Bend is on the schedule for this year.
Okay, so you're basically gonna go in and you're not gonna do the whole Hager's Bend? Yes?
from county line to chapel.
Oh, okay, but you're just gonna take the top off and,
A lot of patching, and then I'd have to take a look at them, I think, well, some of it we do have to mill off the surface, the
Okay.
existing surface. But I think some of it we can resurface.
all right, thank you.
So Dan, given that we haven't hit the 3.2 in how many years? 10?
I wouldn't say 10, I don't have the numbers in front of me. I know we went out to bid with about 3.2 miles of road this past year. Bids came in too high, so we had to deduct part of it. Within the past few years, we had, very close to 3.2 miles, 3.1, 3.15. That was a handful of years ago.
Okay, but we really haven't hit our targeted number for,
Certainly not on average.
yeah. So what makes you think that we can meet it and exceed it now?
It's a question of budgeting, if the village is willing to budget sufficient funds to actually hit that resurfacing mark each year, I think that's what it boils down to. If that's not the case, then we have to work within the budget that we get in the bridges fund.
And this has been the problem for the last few years. We've had some unexpected serious drainage problems that had not been addressed for, the one with Dana Lane and Three Lakes Road had not been addressed for, as a resident said, for 30 years that she's lived there. And these projects are extremely expensive, and they're also part of the roads and bridges budget. So when you have a project like that that has to be done, and we actually have done resurfacing on Dana Lane, Cedar Drive, and Three Lakes Road, but before that could be done, we had to address the drainage problems. And when you have the drainage problem that becomes 25% of your budget in order to do this, then significantly you cannot go ahead and catch up and do as many miles resurfacing, because we could not do those roads without doing the drainage first. You have these unexpecteds. This is why Dan has made in his recommendation that we not go too far out, because the farther out you go, you get into situations where you have different conditions or something starts to break down. For example, this year, we had Helm Road, or not Helm, Healy Road, which completely came apart last winter. It was not on the schedule. We had to add it to the schedule this year, and it was completely unexpected. Last year, we had a culvert that completely collapsed, and that had to be redone. So you have these unexpecteds that happen, and with the weather and the severe winters we've had, and the extreme flooding we've had the last 2 years, you have issues that arise that you're not expecting, and suddenly you have to deal with them, and that's where you end up not maybe making, like last year, where we didn't do the entire length of Meadowville Road because we simply didn't have the money in the budget.
So Dan, can I ask you, the budget for drainage is a separate line item in the budget for the roads, is that correct?
That we're
So-
looking at here.
Right,
This is
it's
just
still in
roads.
it's under the roads and bridges fund, but it is separate from the road maintenance contracts. line
Right.
item.
But it's part
Right,
of our budget.
so, the records from the village treasurer show that we spent, anywhere between $800,000 and $700,000 on roads a year for resurfacing, not on drainage, that's a separate line item. So are you saying that the money that was budgeted wasn't actually spent on road resurfacing, that we defrayed it somewhere else, or?
I think it varied from year to year. Typically, we go into the budget meeting in October with a proposal to resurface 3.2 or more miles of road. And for several years in a row, the goal was to hold the levy, not increase taxes. So as the discussion unfolded and different areas were cut, roads and bridges was typically one of those areas because it's one of the largest pieces of the budget.
Right, but for instance, in 2007, $800,000 was budgeted just for road resurfacing, not on drainage or any of the other issues. Was that money spent on road resurfacing? That's what I'm asking.
Typically, yes.
Okay. So another $808,000 and $208, that would have been spent on the roads?
So we're looking,
2009, it went down to 500, but then we go to 600, 600, 710, 710. We've spent a significant amount of money on the roads, or at least we budgeted to spend it.
Right.
Is there a reason why we didn't hit the 3.2 with that amount of money in the budget for the roads? That's what I'm trying to figure out.
Well, I think if you look at the estimates in 2015 dollars, 3.2, even for this coming year, 3.2 miles of road works out to over $1 million. We haven't been budgeting at that level currently.
That's the problem that I have, and Patty and I talked a little bit about this at the Roads and Bridges meeting the other day. The problem that I have is I'm looking here at a 5-year program that doubles the amount of money to spend on our road resurfacing and repaving. It's gonna be up $300,000 next year, or more, Patty, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's gonna be up $750,000 to $800,000 more.
This was if we did the projected.
Projection, yeah, I'm using the projections. In 2017, it would be 850, 900,000 more. Here's my issue. You're giving us options, which I appreciate. But the problem that we have is, the one option we don't have is, where is the $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, $800,000 in additional money gonna come from to fund this? That's the big problem that I have. I don't have an option here that has been our standard $700,000 to $800,000 per year. I don't see that here.
We'd have to require that there'd be less road done. I mean, that's your option. It's either you're gonna raise taxes or you're gonna do less road.
Right, so if we want to stay in the $700,000 to $800,000 range for resurfacing, then we simply have to adjust it, and this is what's been done in the past if you have, when the budget has been cut, and Dan's right.
So in a way, 3.2 is a misnomer. I mean, you shouldn't even use a benchmark of 3.2. If you should use a benchmark of, we've got X dollars to spend, how much road will that buy us?
Right, and based on.
And that's a more honest way to do it.
No, I agree, and then the other part is, at the end of the year, we ought to be able to figure out what we need going into the next year, which we talked about.
Right.
First,
I think it was 3.2 was aspirational.
Well, I think that's based on what's needed to maintain the existing pavement condition.
Well, this will be shocking to the residents, because we're talking almost a doubling of what we annually need to maintain the roadways. And I'm looking at the numbers of 1.3, and if we did 700 2 years ago, now we're at 1.3 and 16, 1.5. I mean, and I'm not saying this to shock anybody, but where is the $700,000 to $800,000 of additional money gonna come from? We've got the state maybe gonna clip us for $208,000 next year. This is a significant issue, and Patty and I discussed this. It's on to vote tonight, but I think there's a lot more research here that needs to be done. Number one, I think we're going at it backwards, and I agree with you, Joe. Isn't it more about what we can afford to spend and what we're gonna have to go to the taxpayer with before we sit here tonight and try to approve a number that we have no idea where the money's gonna come from? And I don't mean to put that on you, Dan, you're the village engineer, but at the end of the day, to me, to say we're gonna double it, boy, we
No,
gotta figure out.
I don't think we should vote on it, we don't know enough, and we can't project it. And the other thing, and I did not propose that we were going to vote on it tonight. The other thing is that based on, Marty, your questions about what would it take to catch up with the backlog.
Yeah.
This is what it's gonna take to catch up with the backlog.
Then the second question is, can we afford it?
Yeah.
And
No,
then
the
the
answer is
third
no.
question is, where does the money come from?
But the other thing is that this is one reason that we did the pavement condition study last year, so that there's a lot of new technology that's available that was not available 10 years